Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Chess with Konstantin. Today, we are going to continue the Legendary Chess Masters series with another game by one of my favorite old masters, Rashid Nezhmetdinov, who is known for his incredibly exciting games where he goes all out in the attack and sacrifices multiple pieces in order to checkmate his opponent. Now, this particular game was still played in 1931 when Nezhmetdinov was still, I would say, a high expert level player, rated about 2000 in today's terms. This guy had an interesting life. So when he was starting out his chess career, he was in a minority group, and he did not get the attention or the instruction that a lot of more privileged people with connections got. And then in the 1930s, just as he was starting to get good and gain basically master level playing strength, World War II happened. And he, of course, was drafted off to war. And it was quite interesting that he had a very large multiple year interruption in his career. And despite that, even though he wasn't able to leave the Soviet Union on many occasions, he nevertheless, on the occasions he did leave the country, he was able to obtain the norms for the international master title. So Nezhmetdinov is really quite fascinating, but this game is from when he was young, and it's against a fellow named Korchmar, who is not a particularly famous player, probably rated about 2000 or 2100 in today's terms. Now, our hero here is playing black, and Mr. Korchmar plays d2 to d4. This is known as the queen's pawn opening. Perhaps famous now because of the Netflix show is the Queen's Gambit that arises from d4, d5, and on to c4. But d5 is not the only response. Here it is possible to play knight to f6. It's possible to play even pawn to g6. This is called the modern defense. It is also possible to play pawn to c5 and pawn to e5. Certainly very interesting positions arise from that, but it's accepted wisdom that d5 is one of the stronger replies. So d5 was indeed played here. And then we have knight to f3, knight to f6, and now bishop to g5. The point of this move, bishop to g5, is not to capture the black's knight, not at all. But the point is to get the bishop kind of out of the way and developed, and also to apply this what's called indirect pressure on the queen. So what I mean is now black's development will be slowed down, at least in theory, or be a little bit awkward. For example, if you play a normal move like pawn to e6, now this knight is pinned, and meaning it cannot move, otherwise the queen will be captured. And that's really the point of a move like bishop to g5. So a lot of people will play h6 here right away, causing him to make a decision. Do I want to move back? Do I want to capture the piece? Do I want to move to f4? But in this situation, after bishop to g5, black simply played e6. The idea being that Nezhmetdinov wasn't really afraid of the spin because he could play a move like bishop to e7, simply developing his own bishop and preparing castling on the king side. All right. So now white plays the move e2 to e3. Blocking of this diagonal. I should note that a lot of the time when the bishop is not developed here, white will play this pawn wedge with e3, c3, and d4, and actually develop the bishop not here but on b2, on this long diagonal right here. And this is another way to treat the opening as white. So this is certainly not the only square you could develop your bishop to. But the game continued bishop to e7, and now we have bishop to d3, all normal moves. Bishop d3 prepares castling kingside, which would be the normal or orthodox way to continue this. Black castles, and now of course white is getting adventurous and playing knight to d2, because it would be too boring to castle again. And black wants to start some kind of pressure or attack in the center, so rather than playing a move like knight to d7, knight to c6, maybe even bishop to d7, black right away goes ahead and plays pawn to c5. This move does a few things. So first of all, I mean, we're not really afraid of black capturing here. In fact, that would be, white capturing here. This would be quite good for black because the pressure in the center would be alleviated, and you could just pick up this pawn at your leisure. You don't even have to take it right away. Also, I'm quite fond of moves like c5 actually, because this is a way to undermine your opponent's center. So white plays c3, he did not capture this. And now black plays b6. The idea, very simple. Simply you're freeing up the b7 square for this long diagonal here. Now white decides to play knight to e5. Usually you don't want to move the same piece multiple times in the opening when you still haven't castled, but this is not a major mistake. Certainly while the move doesn't accomplish too much, maybe gaining some space, it is not a fatal mistake. Black continues development with bishop to b7. And now white, rather than castle, which would be a normal move, he plays pawn to f4 now. Pawn to f4 gains additional space on the king side, supports this knight on e5, and potentially if black plays moves like pawn to h6, the bishop, rather than capturing here, can retreat. And okay, so f4 is not terrible. And black continues his own development with knight b to d7. Here, in this position, computer is giving it as completely equal. I completely agree with this evaluation. Both sides have developed all of the pieces. Maybe white is a little bit behind in development because he still has not castled, and so black has an opportunity to gain an initiative, meaning black can have a chance to drive the action. But if white castles in the next move, position will be completely equal, and either side would have attacking and winning chances. Now the problem here is that white decided to be a little bit too adventurous in the next few moves, and rather than being classical or orthodox in the style and castling kingside, white decided to spend a few moves to instead castle queenside. This plan is incorrect because it spends several moves on this plan, and this basically spends the time that could have been used on an attack and allows black to gain the initiative. So now the game will illustrate why sometimes fancy plans with queenside castling are not a good idea for the white player. So we have a move queen to f3, preparing castle queenside. And now black plays knight d7, takes e5. So this knight was captured. White now has to decide which pawn to use to capture this knight. Many people would play f takes, because with the idea that actually white can continue with kingside castling, or even if white castles queenside, this will be a semi-open file on which the rook could occupy and put some pressure or organize some kind of attack here. However, really in this position, d takes is much better. The reason why d takes is better is because taking with the f pawn here allows for some unfortunate tactics by black, which black has taken advantage of. So let us see what happened. After captures and f captures, we have a very good move, knight to e4. Now notice this move already is gaining an initiative. The knight here is attacking black's bishop, which is also attacked. White's bishop, which is also attacked by black's bishop here with a skewer. So if white does something like knight takes knight, then you have this problem, and white will be down a piece. This is not possible. So after this move, black is really all but forced to capture on e7. Let's promote this variation. And queen captures back on e7, of course. You don't want to lose your queen. And now, rather than capturing on e4, which is certainly possible, white decides to castle queenside. Castling queenside is indeed a mistake, but it's not obvious right away why it's a mistake, unless you play a few more moves, which is, let's take a look. So after that queenside castle, and I guess I should note that when I said capturing here is possible, I meant capturing with the bishop. So knight takes knight actually loses a piece. Can you see why it loses a piece? Take a moment and really consider it. So the reason why the knight takes knight doesn't work here is that you simply have d takes e, forking the queen and the bishop, and bishop takes e4 runs into this intermediate check, queen h4 check. So now if the king moves, or you can do whatever, you can block, it doesn't matter, but now notice that there is a double attack on the bishop on the e4 square. So after this, just queen takes and black is completely winning. So I should mention this before we move on to what happened in the game. Bishop takes knight, on the other hand, is very possible, because now if bishop takes e4 and d takes e, there is no danger. You can just move back, and there's no trick with check. Still this is I would say it's uncomfortable for white to allow black to have a bishop on a very strong diagonal and this supported pawn. So I would not recommend this continuation for white. But let's move back. So after this, White did decide to castle Queenside. And now we have f5, supporting our own knight on this key e4 square. And notice that now Black, before he starts attacking on the queen side, he wants to firmly entrench himself on the king side to prevent any kind of attacks, mating attacks that White could try. So the move f5 does accomplish blocking this diagonal, and we are not really afraid of a move like en passant here, because simply you can capture with the rook, attacking the queen, and this will be actually quite good, quite a good setup for Black. So now we have rook to f1 by White. My apologies, it's actually rook d to f1, which is much worse than the other rook. So you don't want to withdraw this defensive piece from the queen side, but White is imagining that there is some kind of attack, and really there is nothing here. So by playing rook d to f1, White is making quite a large mistake. So we have rook to c8, a to c8 I should say. Now there is indirect pressure on White's king, and we play a silly move now as White, rook h to g1, with the idea of course to push, but this is again a mistake. You are ignoring, you don't want to ignore all the possible attacks, indirect though they may be. White does not have time for moves like this, and really a reasonable move here could be, certainly you can't move the king away now because this knight is hanging, but certainly even king to well, see, do you see the problem? Now the king can't move away because this is losing. This was the reason why rook to f1, d to f1 was such a big mistake. So the game continued indeed with rook to h to g1. Now we have capture, c takes. Notice this pawn already is pinned, it cannot recapture back, so this is already a problem for White. So of course e takes d4. And now we have a great move and a great illustration why these open files are so dangerous. Nezhmetdinov, without hesitation, takes his knight and sacrifices it for an attack. So knight takes on c3, b takes on c3. Certainly you can't ignore this sacrifice, you must accept it, otherwise you'll simply be down material and in a much worse position than you started. Notice now that the queen is able to come into play. So after b takes c3, rook takes on c3 with check, and after king to b1, notice that king d1 actually also loses. So hypothetically, if he ran to d1, a queen would come to a3. There is a double attack on this piece, and really after, for example, king to e2, protecting it, still you would play rook takes d3 here. Because if the queen recaptures, then you have spectacular bishop to a6, skewering this piece. So actually running away to the other direction also doesn't work. So in the game, rather than playing king to d1, white decided to try to run the other direction and played king to b1, but that also does not save him, because queen to a3 happens anyway. There's a double attack on the d3 bishop, and knight played to b3 to try to disrupt this. Then we have bishop to a6. Bishop cannot move because the queen will be hanging. And now after rook f to d1, protecting this bishop, and Nezhmetdinov found a very interesting move, bishop to c4. Not capturing this piece, but actually attacking the knight that is a key defensive piece in white's position. So now again, this bishop cannot capture the bishop, or it can, but the queen will be lost. And the threat is, of course, bishop takes b3 is a strong mating attack. So now there is really nothing to do here. White did try to play knight to c1 to attempt to protect the bishop and kind of attempt to hold the mate, but rook c3 takes c1 check, sacrificing the exchange, and after rook is forced to capture, you have queen takes a2 checkmate. And this is a wonderful illustration, ladies and gentlemen, why sometimes it could seem like you're safe, but really time is the most important commodity in chess. So no matter how safe you think you are, you shouldn't waste moves on silly things like this. Instead, you should make sure that your king is safe, and rather than starting a fancy queenside castling plan, white should have simply castled kingside and been quite fine. But notice how quickly this game deteriorated. And it all started with that move queen to f3 and the incorrect castle. Now black just plays such natural moves here. After this, you have the natural rook to c8 and just capturing the piece. I mean, how easy is it to really play this as black, and how difficult is it to play it as white, especially after white moves away the key defensive piece. I mean, look at this. Look how vulnerable white's position is here. Well, and that's it. That is the illustration of why it's a bad idea to castle queenside when you don't have the initiative. The next time we'll come back with yet another Rashid Nezhmetdinov classic. Until next time, Konstantin out.